Okay, well, welcome everybody to the W&LLR Virtual Meeting on behalf of Simon Bowden, Jeff Gauntlet and myself. Very pleased to welcome you to this talk, which is going to be about the W&LLR, that's the Welshpool Level Light Railway, from closure in 1986 until reopening in 1963. And Mike Christensen, who was there at the time, is going to be, I know I was there sort of person, will tell us all about it. Anyway, before we start, just to emphasise, we are recording this session, which will go into the archives and maybe published later. And also, to avoid unwanted noise, I would recommend that you mute your microphone, but Mike Christensen is very happy for everybody to butt in with questions, so just unmute when you want to speak. If we don't have a mute microphones, we might get other extraneous noises interrupting the talk for other people. Anyway, so that's little beginning items there. And we'll have a little bit of a break at an appropriate time. Mike will tell us when he's free for a break, and then we'll crack on. Okay, then. So to introduce Mike, welcome him back to our meetings. He's first joined the W&LLR in the late 60s. I first met him in the late 60s. He obviously joined earlier. And at that time, he was what was known as a regular volunteer who appeared frequently. Although in more recent years, he's moved on to the Talyllyn Railway and got closely involved up there. He's an authority on military railways and has given us excellent talks on the Woolmer Instructional Railway and the Longmoor Military Railway. And last year he told us about the trip to Austria with some other W&LLRs to look for an engine which ended up with the purchase of 699 080 tank. Anyway, tonight he's going to talk about the early days of the W&LLR between when it closed in 1956 and reopened eventually in 1963. At that time, of course, it was just a derelict line. There were two engines stored away at Oswestry Works. No passenger stock, not many other reserve railways about, and a fairly remote place. So, Mike, over to you.
Just waiting for the host to enable my screen.
That's ready for you, Mike.
Right, and then hopefully you've now got a screen showing Welshpool and you can hear me. Can someone confirm, please?
Yes, I can hear it, Mike. I can see it.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. One preliminary to explain how this all comes about. Most of the photographs, in fact, pretty well all of them in this show, were taken by a chap by the name of Godfrey Yeomans. Yeomans was an employee of BR at Derby, quite senior, I think, which gave him the money to have good cameras and a car when most people didn't. And of course, being a BR employee, he had a good in onto what was going to happen and when. Like a lot of members of organisations like the SAS, he took a keen interest in particular lines. And as soon as it became clear that the Welshpool and Lambert was going to be the subject of a preservation attempt, he became the East Midlands and North Staff's branch area secretary. And by 1964, he was carrying the title of company historian. He took a lot of photographs and has bequeathed them when he died to the Railway Studies Library at Newton Abbot, where they are being slowly indexed and catalogued by me. There's about 8,000 in total. And the problem is that there was no index to them at all. So all that the Railway Studies Library acquired was a lot of Photoshop wallets with negatives in. The individual negatives, because most of these were in the days of large format, not 35mm. The negatives are simply in little wallets, many of them with no description of what they are. If you're lucky, you might get Somerset and Dorset and a date. In the case of the W&L, it simply says W&L. Occasionally it says a date on the sleeve, but that date may apply to only some of the photographs. So getting a record of the dates is quite difficult, and much of the information I'm going to give you about people comes from my memory. If any of it is wrong, please do chip in and say so straight away. So without preamble, let us start. So here is a view pre-closure of Walshpool Yard. A locomotive on the left is at the coaling stage taking coal. There's some sheep wagons on the curve round to Water Lane Road. Locomotive and carriage shed in the middle.
Mal Fletcher, mute.
So this is looking the other way. Locomotive is up there at the coaling stage. 2 brake vans in view. Interesting that the door ends of both brake vans are at this end of the vans, which means that at some time, because one of the vans latterly had the door end at the other end of the van, at some time the vans must have been turned. So shunting must have taken them round the triangle. Interesting also, the brake van on the right, you notice, has the external brake operating gear. This has been a little bit slow to move on to the next slide. This is the viaduct over the Cleddon Brook, looking towards Seven Stars. And you can see that even in those days when trains were operating, the ladies were wont to catch the sun and hang the washing out wherever they could. I had to do something slightly different about moving the pictures on. Bear with me while I get a grip on this. Right, here's a view looking up Golver towards the summit. Those of you who are around the railway these days will know that that area is now completely wooded over, and it just shows how much the scenery has changed in the intervening period. Here's the train just arrived at Lambert. Interesting number of cattle wagons in the train. And those who didn't know the old Lambert will not remember the 2 Great Western coach bodies that have been put up on stilts to keep the rats away that were used for storage. The bars across the window on the inside were so that you could stack sacks or whatever up against the windows without actually breaking them. And there's another view of the train just arrived, the booking office as it was, and the galvo shed as it was when we inherited it. A view looking from the long shed now eastwards towards Walshpool, the other coach body there on the left, and a notable amount of coal in the coal wagons. Now this is the SLS special of 30th June 1956. Closure was now imminent, but this was not the last day train. That ran on the 3rd of November. So this is the 30th of June. The SLS ran a train with ordinary coal wagons, very well filled. This is the train on the way back. Stopped at Castle for everyone to get out and take their photographs, although most people didn't and probably couldn't get out of those wagons. And the side-on view of 823, train ready to depart. Sorry about this jiggling about. So this now, we've moved on to August 1957. So the railway's been closed for nearly a year, and the rolling stock, as you can see, had been assembled at Walshpool, most of it on the 3 lines curving round towards the Smithfield Road, and a couple of wagons down towards the loco and carriage shed. But as yet, the scrapmen have not moved in. And that's pretty much the same view. Wagon on the right looks pretty well derelict already. I don't know where they got that from, or indeed how they got it there. And that's a view from the Smithfield Road through towards the yard. A whole scene of dereliction. But nothing as bad as this. We've now moved on to September 1960. And as you can see, the scrapmen have been in and pretty well savaged all the rolling stock. And it was to avoid this fate that some members of the Embryo Preservation Organisation took a number of wagons up to Raven Square. Didn't have a locomotive at the time, so famously they did with horsepower. But it wasn't long before the scrapmen got in. That's the four-lever ground frame that was at the Lambert end of the layout at Rochepole. We'll see that again in a number of pictures. It appears to have, in preservation, moved around quite a lot. And then climbing out of the yard at Rochepole, you pass this sign not to exceed 5 miles an hour up the wicked little gradient that there is out of Rochepole Yard up to the canal bridge. I can't imagine that many drivers actually obeyed that speed limit when they were trying to climb the hill. And you can see there the change of gradient.
Sorry, Mike, what is IMP on that sign, please?
Right, the speed limit.
Milepost, Walter.
To milepost 1.
Thank you, I get it. Sorry, thank you.
That's at Raven Square.
Which we will see in a minute. So the railway topped the canal and then the gradient eased, going round to the road crossing at Church Street. And then past up 7 Stars, the railway started climbing again quite seriously towards Ronald Buckley Estate, which is all those houses at the back there. Pardon me. And halfway up the climb, you had to, well, you were supposed to be going no more than 5 miles an hour anyway. There's a sound whistle board. In the middle distance there is the road level crossing of the road leading up to Ronald Buckley. If you drive up there now, there's still a small level pitch in the road from where the railway was. That's looking now the other way towards Ronald Buckley, getting up towards the Raven Square roundabout. Whoops. I haven't got to see a touch. There we are. Pardon me. Here's the house which is still there as you come up towards the Standard Quarry site. And then as you got a fair way up the bank beyond Raven Square, you came to this board, which is the reverse of the 5 mile an hour speed limit. So it's 5 miles an hour only from here all the way to Rochepole Station. Can't imagine many drivers obeyed that. This now is on a foggy day. We've got as far as Golver Station. Not quite sure. The problem with all the yeoman stuff is that much of it is undated. And I cannot guarantee you that this little lot is going to be in anything like date order. And so I've decided to bring it to you in subject order. Don't know when this was taken, because what's odd about this is that the points are normal and the levers in the lever frame are reversed. And you shouldn't be able to do that without the train staff. So something in this little lot has been disconnected. So that's Golver looking east. And that's the little Golver station hut looking west. Level crossing in the middle distance by the telegraph pole that's to the left of the line. And this is stepping back a little bit further towards Rochepole. That's Golver Hut, looking again up the incline. This is the east end of Golver, looking downhill to Rochepole. And this must be in early preservation days because someone has started de-turfing. One of the early jobs you had to do on the W&L was to take the turf off just to find the condition of the sleepers. We'll come to some more de-turfing later on. This shows actually very nicely how the old W&L had some very wide-width sleepers. And if you look through towards the common crossing, the frog of the points, you'll see that they were quite clever in the way that they interlaced those long sleepers rather than have to use long crossing timbers, which were probably in short supply. So this is looking west at Sylvan. where there was a set of points and absolutely nothing else in those days. There's a siding underneath that lot somewhere. And that's looking Sylvan looking the other way, farm that we all know on the other side of the road, and what remains of the gate at the entrance. This is Castle. Famous for a long time was the traction engine, which stood there privately owned and quietly rusting. I can't remember what make it was. In the foreground, you can see the sheep loading dock with the west ground frame just beyond it. There's the station hut and the signal box, which dated from the signalling by Tyre and Company when this passing route was signalled for a brief period. There's the signal box, in some state of decay. And for many years into preservation, there was a handrail on one side only, exactly as you see in that photograph. No platform, of course. You didn't need it. So we've moved on to Caereinion. Centre right is the base for the old passenger hut. On the left is the sheep loading dock. And the ground frame, the points in a position not where they are now. They used to be further east than they are now. This is Brunellian Viaduct. I like this photograph because it, on the assumption that the top parapets of the viaduct are level, this gives you a very good impression of how steeply the railway climbs up from the area we know as the Kink towards Caereinion Station. Trees across the line in the background, I don't think those are fallen over. I think they've been felled. And we'll come to tree felling and what it meant to the railway in a bit. Oops. This is looking towards the Kink from some distance on the Lambeth side. Trees all over. In fact, if you look into the far distance, very faint, they're there. You can see trees that have clearly been felled across the railway. And take note of all those trees up on the right, because we'll come back to that subject a bit later on. Pennymarth, same sort of period, the dereliction, the closed period. Perhaps, I say perhaps because someone has taken the switch blades and the common crossing out of the point. So this may be early preservation days when they wanted track materials for what they were doing down at Raven Square, which again we'll come to in a moment. There's not many colour photographs in the Yeoman's collection. This is a rather nice one, showing the very locked out appearance of the old Lambeth station. But Lambeth very much featured in the closure days as a coal yard, because the coal merchants retained the yard for their business long after the railway ceased carrying coal, and indeed into the early preservation days. The fact that the coal merchants had a deal that they could use Lambeth Yard meant that in the early days of the W&L, the preservation company did not have access to Lambeth Yard and had to conduct all its operations from the Washpool Lane. As you can see, the coal was all over the place, and if you look on the cattle dock there, in all sorts of sizes as well. Oops. Sorry about this. This photograph may actually predate the previous one, I don't know, because in the previous one, the coal was all over the place. If you look at this photograph, you see the coal is massively stacked high. So you've got station buildings, Garbo shed and the coach bodies on the left, end of the long shed in the middle, and one of its awnings on the right-hand side. And that's the view looking out from Lambeth towards Washpool. Very little had travelled over that way for several years when that photo was taken. And that's the view looking back. Quite an old lorry there in the coal yard, but again, all you can see is mountains of coal. And again, in that black and white shot, the ground frame's there, but mountains of coal. Down at Washpool, when the scrapmen lifted everything, the W&L was left with one siding alongside the cattle dock ramp. And that was to be useful because for many years, until the town section was closed, that was the way that we got things in and out. And here you can see a selection of WL wagons. The cattle van lost its wheels at a fairly early state, and then it migrated to being stored at various sites all around the W&L, and that's the vehicle that eventually went to the Festiniog, which you will see at Castle dumped on the ground later on. And I said that in the earliest days, the preservation operations, the volunteers, all had to be based around Rochepole. I've no idea what these chaps were doing, but they very much capture the atmosphere of the earliest days of volunteering on the W&L. I like that photo. So the new company had to have its base at Raven Square, and it had to somehow make it operational. So this point was laid in to allow you to have a locomotive stored in that shed if you wanted to, although in the earliest days, of course, there was no locomotive until we got Raven. And the rolling stock just accumulated here. To stop naughty people letting these vehicles run down into the town, you'll see that they took out 2 lengths of rail. That was later reinstated. This is by no means the end of the town section when you see this photograph. But it was a good precaution because there's nothing to stop somebody breaking the lock of the brake van, getting in and releasing the brake. And with not else that they could do, the volunteers spent a lot of time and to very good effect in protecting with paint the vehicles that we had acquired. So here is one of the company's brake vans, beautifully painted up. Hanging on the end is a letterbox, because the company had this problem that people were going to write to the railway care of Rochepole, but the preservation company did not have a single building that it owned on which you could have the letterbox to receive the post. So that was where the company's post was received. And it was looked after by a chap we'll come to meet in a minute, who generally kept an eye on the whole site and looked after our post. And the layout, bizarrely, changed quite often. We've seen the short stub siding. This, I think, was the next iteration where a loop has been laid in so that little hut has gone. The point has a sort of Y configuration. It isn't straight and curved. It has a Y configuration, and I think the railway is still open into the town section at this time. Because you can see something of the distance. I'm not sure if that's a temporary buffer stop or a permanent one. And there's a point lever on the left doing nothing as well, because the loop has been lengthened significantly, and now it's a different configuration of the point. That's straight and go left, because previously we had a Y point. So just during those early years at Raven Square, the track layout was changed a number of times, and an enormous amount of effort must have gone into that. And eventually, of course, we lost the town section, and the Army, as one of their jobs, built us a very substantial stop block at Raven Square. I'm dodging about, as you'll have gathered by now, in timescales, because that's the easiest way of dealing with the subject. So I mentioned that with nothing else that they could do, the volunteers spent their time painting rolling stock in the open air at Rochepole. And here's a good example of what they achieved. And here's an even better one. That's almost all the rolling stock that they recovered. And look, apart from the brake van on the left, which needs some attention to its roof, almost everything has been painted out in the open. It's an era that has by and large been forgotten. But a lot of good work was done in difficult circumstances at that time. This sign, some of you may have seen, was just on the Rochepole side of New Drive Crossing. I think it'd be rather nice if we put that back in. It'd be meaningless in the current context, I know, but wouldn't it be nice to have that back? So we moved on a little bit in time. We've now got to Dover again, but the whole place has grown considerably more derelict. The passenger waiting hut has disappeared. The tracks nearly disappeared in the level crossing. But t'other end has been deturfed, and the track looks quite presentable. But again, something's odd is going on here. The FPL lever is over, and there's no staff in it. But I know from personal experience, and perhaps one shouldn't say it, that quite a few drivers knew how to dismantle the lock, move the points, and put them back again without a train staff in those days. This is an early version of Sylvan, where to maintain road access on the right, the ground frame was put in to the left, the south side of the line. And in order to make it operational, this peculiar little platform was built out. A brake van was stored in the siding. On the occasions when we used to run trains to Sylvan and the turnover locomotive would be there to help shut down the train, that was effectively accommodation for the crew.